We're so glad you're here. Welcome back. We hope you got to connect with some others and got to get in the spirit of summertime here. So we're excited to kick off summer and to just be planning and ahead and dreaming big for the new adventures ahead of us. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to the amazing Alyssa and Annie, and they're going to lead us through some updates for the summer. So
Thank you, Stephanie. And I should have said that Emily is actually going to be facilitating most of this. And so, but I will be back on to talk about EGMS. I bet everybody can't wait to hear. So Emily.
Yay, Emily.
I know I can't wait to hear about EGMS again. It's my most, I just look forward to it every time. It's so exciting. All righty, so let's go ahead and get started. Stephanie, if you can go to the next slide. Yeah, so Alyssa and I are here today to speak on behalf of Title I, and Annie has also joined us for a few reminders for LAP as well. We can move forward. And another one. So today we're just going to talk about closing the school year, which I'm sure we're all really excited about. We're going to have an exit survey, which will take about 10 minutes. Alyssa's going to lead us through some EGMS office hour information, trainings, and more. And we'll do a little bit of preparation for the upcoming year and talk just a little bit, actually just drop off some resources for you guys for our summer programs. We do have quite a full plate today, so some of these will just be there left for you to look at on your own time since we don't want to take up too much time. We can move forward. Okay, so with that said, Form Package 795 has launched. If you have a school that you would like to turn into a school-wide program, you can fill out this waiver if that school is below the 40% poverty. You can still apply for the waiver, even though it's below the 40% poverty. If your school is already at or above 40% low income, you do not need to fill out the waiver for it to become a school-wide program. Also, if you have a school-wide program that has fallen below 40%, you still do not need to fill out this waiver. Once your school-wide program, you can stay a school-wide program unless you fall below the district average for poverty. You can move on. All right. Program reporting. Our end of year Form Package 244 will open in June. The report is much shorter this year. Other happy news, Form Package 246 is not required this year. And finally, school year 22-23, we're going to compile both those reports into the EGMS. So there'll be a one and done type situation, and there will only be 4 simple questions for the summer report. Annie?
Thanks, Emily. Good morning, everyone. So the end of year report has launched in EDS already, but if you've tried to get in there, you may have noticed that it is in maintenance mode. And so our developers are already working really hard to resolve an issue with the nightly load with CEDARS data. And they hope to have that resolved by tomorrow. So fingers crossed that gets resolved on that, according to that timeline, because we also have a webinar for our end of year reporting on May 26th from 2 to 3 p.m. with Lisa Ireland from Student Information. She's the person that you typically go to if you are experiencing technical difficulties with your end of year report. So she will be there supporting us as we go through how to complete the application, including any tips and reminders that may be helpful along the way. And the end of year report is due on September 30th as usual. And we do have an updated user guide that takes you step by step through the application. So that should be a good resource for you as well. And I believe that's it for end of year reporting.
All right, just a couple Little reminders for fiscal for Title I Part A. So for those of you who have carryover or who have been reallocated some more funds, this is just a nice, simple reminder to please get those spent down and just be thoughtful about making really impactful decisions for those funds. So how are you going to spend those funds before the end of the year? If you're wondering about how much time you have to get these funds, these funds spent for obligated, we do have the Federal Procurement Grant Management Bulletin on there for you to look at for reference to help joint memory there. And also the final day to submit 21-22 budget revisions will be October 15th. Annie?
Yeah, and just a few reminders for fiscal related to LAP. So the period for expending your LAP funds for base and high poverty run from September 1st to August 31st. So if you are having trouble expending those funds, there are a few ideas in the April newsletter that was sent out through GovDelivery. So please check that out if you haven't already, or reach out to us. We're more than happy to be thought partners as you strategize how to really intentionally spend those LAP funds for the remainder of this fiscal year. And then just another reminder related to carryover. So each year you can carry over up to 10% for base and up to 10% for high poverty. And LAP high poverty, as you know, those funds must be expended for the students at the buildings that generated those funds, even for carryover. The one exception, and we will have more information about this coming soon, we're waiting to hear from OFM, is actually the stabilization funds that were added this year for you to use in the next school year. That will not be included in your carryover and recovery calculations and should be tracked separately. But as I said, we're waiting to hear from OFM. And so once we hear from them on how they want that to be tracked or claimed, we will send out a message through GovDelivery. So keep an eye out for that information soon.
All right, and for Title I, just a reminder about end of year program evaluations. They are intended to measure the efficacy and impact of your program. So these are means for you to reflect on the data and processes used and adjust as needed. So what do your evaluation findings tell you? What barriers are still presenting themselves and closing opportunity gaps? What plans for improvement are necessary? And then the results of the evaluation, including information about any changes to the program, are shared with the school officials and distributed to all families to the extent practicable in multiple languages. That's a tough word. We can move on. All right, and for parent and family engagement, LEAs and schools must conduct an annual evaluation of the content and effectiveness of your parent and family engagement policy and program. A lot of you guys do this throughout the years, but this is just a simple reminder just to make sure that this has been done this year. And Stephanie, if you click on it, we have a little bit more information on there. Just click. Oh no. Go. I just meant move forward in the slide. There we go. There we go. Yeah. So we have some links here that have some surveys and forums and focus groups, just different ways you guys can go about getting these surveys done. And if you move forward one more time, Stephanie. There we go. You can also copy and paste these into an online survey platform. So there are some resources here for you. All right, next slide. Okay, and with that, I'm going to pass it on to Alyssa, who's going to introduce our exit survey. I'll put the link into the chat for you, Alyssa.
Okay, and Emily, I think 10 minutes has been a little long. How much time? Maybe 7 minutes, 5 minutes?
I think that sounds good.
Okay, well, how about we'll do 5 minutes and then we'll check in to see if it's complete. But we want to take time during the meeting today to ask you to complete an exit survey for us. And this is what we'll use to plan for next year. So this won't be if the whole meeting that Stephanie organizes for your network, but rather for the feedback that you'd like to provide to OSPI for our portion of the meeting. So please fill that out, and you can come back to it later, but try to get started now, because we do need your feedback for our planning for next year. And this will help us decide who to invite to present with us, what topics to prepare for, and hopefully just improve upon what we have done. So it's 10:20 now. We'll come back at 10:25. And the link is there in the chat. Okay, and for my portion, I'm going to be covering EGMS, and so if you wouldn't mind letting me share my screen, Stephanie. Let's see if I can find my Zoom menu again, though, so I can. Okay, here, just one second. Okay. So I'm with the Title I Part A office, and I am also coordinating the consolidated grant application, which is primarily that's what's moving into EGMS for next year. And so today I'd like to go over some resources that are there to help you with the transition, and also share a couple of things that have changed. But primarily I'm here to answer any questions that have come up for you as you know you've worked on getting access to EGMS and done some of the initial training. So please, Emily, if you can let me know if there are any questions that pop up in the chat, and for if folks can feel free to just unmute and ask me questions. And for Stephanie, anybody in the room that has questions, just unmute and ask, because I'm not very good at, I'm on my little laptop, so I'm not going to necessarily see if somebody raises their hand. So this is the EGMS webpage, and you just need to go to the OSPI website and put EGMS in the search. It'll be the first link that pops up. And the first resource that I'd like to share with you is the this infographic that talks about the grant cycle. Actually, before I do that, though, I'll remind everyone that in the consolidated grant application, these are the program areas that will be included. So these are the only funding sources that are in EGMS for school year 22-23. So all the rest are going to be in iGrants. The workflow is a little bit different from iGrants. And so right now, the step of the process that we're in is with the LEA EGMS administrator. So the EGMS administrator has been, we've attempted to identify that individual for each district, and we've provided some training on how the EGMS administrator would set up their account. And this is the person who manages the users in your district. And right now should be inviting the users in your district to set up their accounts in EGMS. This role doesn't really have, doesn't really can support the other stages of the grant process, but there's nothing else that this role would be, you know, the only person responsible for. It's just managing users. That's the only thing that's unique to the administrator. And each district has been given a cap on the number of users between 3 and 10, depending on your enrollment. So hopefully your EGMS administrator is someone who will help with other parts, other aspects of the consolidated grant application. The other thing that you can be doing now is to sign off on the general assurances. And I'll share with you where to find that, and some training on the general assurances. But right now, I would encourage everyone to get their general assurances signed off on. That has to happen every year. And then within the next few days, we will launch the pre-application for the consolidated grant application. And that will show up in the opportunity tab. So it's not there yet. You'll want to make sure that for your users, you're identifying them as their program is the ESEA Consolidated Grant, so that they're notified when we launch the pre-application. And another decision that you'll want to be making now is who in your district will be managing the pre-application process, because whoever clicks to create the pre-application becomes the only person who can later submit it. So you don't want to go exploring and accidentally click on that unless you are the person that your district has identified to coordinate the pre-application and get it submitted. The pre-application is the equivalent to the SAS process in iGrants. And it also includes the questions that you would have seen in form package 821 around transferability. And it's one process for all 7 of the funding sources, and you don't need to do a preliminary budget for that. So then once that's submitted, you will see a blue message that shows that you've submitted your pre-application, but we will not approve it until we have our final allocations and we're ready to make the full application available to you, which should happen in July. So once we make that available to you, then it's similar to the pre-application. Whoever clicks on create application, it doesn't matter if it's the administrator or a primary or a secondary user, it's just whoever clicks create becomes the only person in your district who can later submit the application. So again, make sure that person is someone who's good at, coordinating people. They're going to be receiving any request revision notifications. So they're good at keeping track of their emails, and maybe someone who's a little more available over the summer, so that they'll be collecting information from staff overseeing all of the programs to make sure everything's in there and complete, and then submitting it. But they, in most districts, won't want to do all of that themselves. So the application owner also invites peer reviewers, who are the other staff who will come in and help fill out the grant pages. They also designate the fiscal lead, and the fiscal lead is the only one who will later be able to submit claims or payment requests. And so in the application, that's where you say who your fiscal lead is, and that person also needs to be one of your users. So another decision that you're making now is who is a primary user and who is a secondary user. So also in EGMS will be the progress reports, which are our end of year reports, the comparability reports for Title I-D. It's the different counts that you submit throughout the year. And then there are also amendment requests. So the carryover budget, if you want to make a change to your grant application, budget revisions. So any user can initiate that process, but only a primary user can submit. So if you do not want someone to be able to submit a budget revision or submit a progress report, then you would identify them as a secondary user. Otherwise, you could designate all of your users as primary if you want everyone to be able to submit the progress reports and the budget revisions. Any questions so far?
There are none in the chat so far, Alyssa.
Thank you. And like I said, feel free to unmute. There's also a crosswalk here. So if you're wondering about what something means and what it used to be in iGrants, hopefully this will be a helpful resource. And to see who your EGMS admin is, if you look in the contact information box in the right hand corner there, where it says LEA district contact list, these are the admins for each district. We've been getting some questions about what's my username. Your username will be your email dot and then your org code. So Elisa's username would be .org.14005. So that's the secret to figuring out your username. We've been getting a lot of questions about that. So shortly we'll be making the pre-application available. Hopefully everyone will get that submitted by July 1st. And when it's available, because we've had people looking for it, when it's available for you to get started on, you'll click on opportunities and it will show up in the list. Right now, if you click on opportunities, there's nothing there yet. And that's as it should be. So, but that's where you'll start when we make it available to you. So if you want to work at your own pace and just follow along with some directions, you can go to the Title I page, and Emily will be sharing this resource in a bit. Go to the program guide, and starting on page 33, sorry for the fast scrolling, whoops, I was too fast because I skipped what I was trying to share with you. Start actually page 34. There are step-by-step instructions with screenshots on how to fill out the pre-application. And same for the application pages, so just a little bit later for each of the pages. So you can work at your own pace following the screenshots. And we also have a tutorial posted. So there's the training that our vendor did, and then there's this pre-application tutorial that Amy Harris and I did. It's already got something like 4 hits in YouTube. It's really fascinating. The first 5 minutes or so go over the general assurances, and the remainder of the video goes step by step over how to fill out the pre-application. And if you just want to be walked through the process and be able to ask questions live, you could right now get your account set up and then not worry about this again until the end of June, when we'll have some workshops where register for one of these, make sure you're the person that's supposed to fill out the pre-application, and we'll have a small group of districts and we'll just fill it out together. So if that's what you'd like to do, please register for one of those workshops. For the application pages, there are also these screenshots. Here's the example for Title IV. We'll have resources for all of the programs here when we get closer to the launch date of the full application. And when you run into questions, you can register for office hours, which we'll have twice a week through from July 13th through mid-October. And we'll have a breakout room for each of the programs. So you can ask the program supervisor from Title I-C a question, and then go to the breakout room for Title I-A and ask us a question. And so hopefully it'll be the one-stop shopping for any support that you need for the consolidated grant application. And if what you'd like is just to fill out the, if you want to be able to fill out your grant pages with somebody there to help, please fill out this form, which I put the link in the chat. It's also in your PowerPoint. And you can let us know that you want us to schedule a small group workshop with you for, which programs to fill out the grant pages together. And then you can get support right there as you're filling out the pages. And the other resource, if you have district specific questions, you can go to the EGMS contacts by district link, and then you can put your district name in, and you can see who for each of the aspects of the consolidated grant application, who is going to read your grant and is your support. So for the pre-application, it's Jamie. For Title III, it's Sue. And you'll see the contacts for each thing there. So any questions so far?
None in the chat, Alyssa.
Thank you. Guys are going really easy on me. A couple of resources I want to make sure you're familiar with is that there's a list of REAP eligible districts. So you'll also be creating a REAP budget if you're eligible and you want to do that. So check and see if you're eligible for that. And then whether your district is required to engage in tribal consultation, and then the affirmation is also there. So also wanted to share, this is the system. Hopefully most of you have already logged in. The piece that you can be working on right now are the general assurances, and you can find them by going to the home and then organization profile. And then the spinning is normal. So you'll experience that, and then go to this assurances tab. So this white bar here these are actually tabs. So you click on assurances and then submit general assurances. And for the school year 22-23, you will select 2023 as the year for the general assurances. And in the past, I think we've gone briefly over some of the pages, but I did want to share a couple of pages that have changed. So to find an application that's already in progress, and I will say I've lost the application before, and if it looks like this, you won't see your left-hand navigation, so you can expand the navigation there. So you go to applications, and then anything you do will be either on the right-hand side or the upper right-hand corner, and you would click on the pencil. And then you wait patiently and do your stretches while it spins. Okay, so everything that you're seeing here is pretty much what you would see in the profile page or the notes section in iGrants. The application pages are under forms and files. And I wanted to share that with the equitable services page. Now you'll see this is why you would want to invite a peer reviewer to help you fill out your grant, because there are 25 forms if you're applying for all of the funding sources. So anyway, the equitable services form, we'll click edit on, and the requirements are exactly the same. Most of this is exactly the same as in iGrants. But the first step in EGMS will be for you to scroll down to where it says in district private schools. These will pre-populate just like they did in iGrants. And the out of district private schools will also pre-populate. So you'll want to make sure this list has already been released by OSPI as well. So you've already got this information, but you'll want to make sure you've reached out to the out of district private schools. And some districts are surprised that they have those, but you might. And then you've consulted with the in-district private schools before you move forward with completing this page. And with the ranking and allocating form, so with the ranking and allocating form, this has changed in the kind of the functionality of it. The table has been pre-populated with your October 1, 2021 counts. So the first step that you'll take is to say, did you have schools that participated in CEP, yes or no? And so if you say yes, you can fill out form B, C, or D. If you say no, you can fill out form A, C, or D. And you can then see the pre-populated information. Will show how your schools rank based on that data. And so in this case, we're looking at SNAP data. And I have used this district to demo a few times. So I just want to say that let's take a look at maybe, let's say Custer Elementary that I have not edited. And so they're with Form D, they're at 55.09% poverty. Form D is SNAP data with the 1.6 multiplier. And the system will, if you give an allocation, based on what it can tell about that school, it will make a guess at the basis for ranking and allocating. So here it thinks it's the 75% rule because this school is above 75%. But if you need to revise the basis, you can in the following column. So we said Custer is at 55.09%. So then you can choose, well, what if we used Form C instead? And okay, it takes a minute to load. So in Form C, it's snap data again, but now no multiplier. So in Form C, Custer Elementary is at 34.43% poverty. And you can also see with Form B, but basically this would allow you to, to determine whether or not your schools rank differently depending on the form that you select. And so one form might have more of your schools above 75% poverty, and then you're required to serve. Another may have more of your schools below 35% poverty, in which case you have to have a minimum per pupil allocation based on the number that displays here, right? So you can see what works the best for you. The other piece is the more low-income students at your Title I served public schools, the lower the per pupil amount in your equitable services set aside will be. So there are a few things you can play around with. And if you choose to use a different count date, you can do that. You would just need to click on, whoops, and I scrolled way too fast and too far, but sometimes the whole table won't display unless you zoom out far enough, but you can click to edit the grade span. You can edit the enrollment count and the poverty count. Just make sure you've reviewed all of your options with October 1 count before you start making changes to a different count date, because you can't go back. So if you decide to choose another count date, you need to change the enrollment and the poverty data for every school so that you have a consistent poverty criteria across all of your schools. And then you need to make notes of what changes that you made. You can also, if there's a missing school, you can add a school. And you can also make some adjustments if there's been a boundary change or whatnot. So that is all that I had for you on EGMS, unless there are some questions.
I have none in the chat, Alyssa.
Okay, thank you. Well, I will stop sharing and I'll be on. If you have questions for me, I'll watch the chat.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, so we have no questions in the room, but we appreciate that overview very much.
All right, well then we can continue on with our Title I reminders. If you want to share that slideshow again, Stephanie.
You bet.
Perfect.
Which slide number would you like to start at?
Let's see here. 20, what looks like 30.
30. All right.
Okay, so next year, 22-23, our regional network meetings will continue to be online with the same format every other month, 2 hours, one for updates and second hour for network or program development. We're also going to continue our virtual office hours, and the coordinated calendar will be ready this summer. We'll send a notification via Title I Part A and LAP newsletter when it has been finalized and is ready on the web. Okay, so securing funding for the 22-23 school year, that application, the pre-application that Alyssa was talking about, will be available on eGMS. That opened in late May, or will open in late May. And the last day for the pre-application that will be accepted will be October 14th. So as soon as you guys are able to get that filled out and submitted, as close as we can get to that July 1st timeframe, the better. Annie?
Yeah, and so for LAP, as usual, you'll want to make sure that you're submitting your form package 218 and iGrants and completing the end of year report in EDS in order to access your LAP funding for the next school year. We do have an updated user guide for form package 218, and it has been launched in iGrants already, so you can get started on completing that as soon as you're able. It's not due until September 8th, but we do encourage you to get that done as soon as possible, along with your end of year report. That way you don't have to worry about accessing monthly apportionment while things are already moving in the school year. And any questions that you may have regarding the form package 218 or the end of year report, you're more than welcome to reach out to our LAP team. I do want to note one of my excitements for the summer was that I am going on maternity leave. We are welcoming a baby boy on July 7th. If he shows up according to his due date, it just depends. Babies don't really listen to you when you want to tell them when to come. But our team will have you covered. So just make sure that you're sending in your questions and your concerns to the LAP general email, and I'll be sure to include that in the chat as well. And thank you so much for all the celebrations, everyone. We're super excited.
Thank you, Annie. That is awesome. Congratulations. All right, so moving on, our year at a glance for the school year 22-23 is now online. So please be sure to share with your participating schools and staff. This is a high-level overview of the program grants and reports with some technical assistance infused in it. We've now combined the Title I and LAP items, and you can use this as a checklist. So thank you, Annie Pinnell, for the suggestions. You can use it to guide you across the school year, share it especially with new staff that must do any of this work, because it will let them quickly know that just one look and see what needs to be done at the beginning, the middle, and the end of the year. Next slide. And our Title I Part A guide has been updated. We now have a summer program section on page 17, which will give program funding guidance from Title I, LAP, and both programs combined. On page 20, we have parent and family engagement information. We will no longer be sending out the parent and family engagement bulletin because all the information is right here for you. And also, as Alyssa was talking about on page 33, we have the consolidated grant application process, a whole walkthrough step by step right there for you if you should need it while you're filling that very exciting thing out. I'm sure you're very excited. Okay, next slide. We do have some other resources. I have updated our Title I Part A early learning guide, and I'll be talking about that a little bit later. We have an updated LAP Q&A, and I have also written new neglected or delinquent set-aside guidance for Title I as well, and I will go into that in the next slide. Okay, next slide. All right, so as I was researching this very important group of students, I came across that they have very unique and separate definitions. So these are very different groups. So I spent a lot of my time just separating the two and writing guidance around what the definitions need to be. So there will be new separate CEDARS codes coming this fall so that the two won't be confused. Before there was only one, so now there will be two. And just keep in mind that these two sets of students can't be taken care of through one or the other. They are different. So if you were to use the set aside for delinquent students, that's who it's for, or those students, not both. All right. Next slide. Okay, so I align my guidance with the program goals, requirements, and definitions of our institutional ed. And I am continually working with them. We're always thinking of new questions and new dilemmas around this area. So, you know, as time moves forward, I'm sure there will be some changes, but for now, there are no approved facilities for neglected youth in Washington. There are no identified neglected youth. So no LEA is required to use this set aside. If you should find students in need, you know of students in need, you can use the guidance provided for neglected youth and consider supporting them via an optional set aside and just use the guidance provided. All right, and then for students identified as delinquent, only LEAs receiving Title I Part D funds to support approved delinquent facilities and their boundaries need to use the Title I Part A delinquent set aside. All other LEAs are encouraged to use the delinquent set aside to support transition services for students who are exiting facilities and returning to schools. Transitional services are things like IDs, clothing, bus passes, counseling services, prevention services, professional development for staff to learn more about how they can support these very needy learners in transition. And also transition specialists are much needed. I also included a list of LEAs who have approved delinquent facilities who are required to have the delinquent set aside. There's also a lot of information embedded about educational advocates. Those are resources for schools to work with. There are people who know these students and can help guide you, help them in the best way possible. All right, moving on to some professional learning opportunities. Oh, actually, no. That's one's too late. We can just skip over that one. Hopefully some of you were able to attend. And now we just have some district reminders for private schools. If Sheila is here, maybe she could speak to this one. Sheila, are you here?
I am. Thanks, Emily. This is just a reminder that if you haven't already started your consultation with your private schools, now is a good time to be doing that. And just a reminder to update your affirmation of consultation in the EDS system. Alyssa was showing you the private school page in EGMS, but just know the affirmation of consultation information is still in EDS at this time. And so if you have any questions about that procedure or interlocal agreements or consultation suggestions, please feel free to reach out to either myself or Julie Chase. Thanks, Emily.
You're welcome. Thank you, Sheila. All right, and we can move along to summer programs. I'm going to just go through these super quickly. We just wanted to have these resources here for you. So we've included all these information for your reference. You can reach out with any questions you may have. So this first is just about Title I Part A and LAP and how you can use those in your summer program for funding, and also how you might combine them as well. The next slide is about ESSER funding and Title IV Part A. So those are how you can use that funding as well for your summer programs. And then if we move along to the next slide, we just have some summer school resources here. National Summer Learning Week has a bunch of different ideas and things that you can implement. And next slide. Yeah, we have some more resources here. There's a learning toolkit from the Wallace Foundation, which can be extremely helpful, in a little walkthrough video on why summer learning is so important. And then if we move along, I'm going to talk a little bit about the guidance I put in our new early learning guide. So this guide is full of best practice tips. I've filled it with links for additional resources. There's a braided funding matrix, which seems to be quite a hot topic these days. I put new examples from LEAs to inspire. I also have additional allowable activities that weren't on there before, and some reporting guidance as well. Next slide. So I worked with our early learning department here at OSPI, as well as at DCYF, with also multiple online resources to be sure to include relevant and meaningful best practice tips and links for more information. They're aligned with state early learning initiatives. So I have transitional kindergarten in here, a whole section for them, transition activities, parent and family engagement, home visits, inclusive classrooms, creating a best practice learning environment, and recruitment and enrollment. All of those have tons of links for more information and ideas. And next slide. So I also included that funding matrix, which will kind of give you that one stop, one look to see what funding can support what activity. And also there's some new CEDARS reporting codes for you. So those are right there for you as well. And if we go to the next slide, this is just part of the matrix. I just wanted to give you guys a little look at what it might look like for you. And that pretty much wraps us up. We can move forward. If you guys have questions for me or Alyssa or Annie, you can always email or give us a call. You can put any questions you might have also in the chat, and we'll be here. That's it. Thank you, Stephanie.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So I'm getting a feedback, so I'm just gonna fix our volume for a second. So we want to say thank you so much to our OSPI colleagues for sharing the updated resources. I'm going to go ahead and get everybody a copy of this PowerPoint right now in the chat, so that if you want to follow along today, or if you want to just check out some resources as we're moving along, it's there. We're also going to send up a follow email, and we are sending out bi-monthly newsletters with important links and chats and resources for Title I Lab and MTSS. So be looking on the lookout. Also, as a reminder, if you have new or incoming Title and Lab directors, if you could send me an email with the updated contact list, I would love to be able to get those resources in those new directors' hands. And we could also provide one-on-one partnerships and support for any new directors that you're onboarding. So please don't hesitate to reach out this summer, and we are happy to support you. And we appreciate our colleagues at OSPI for all of their support as well. We have an amazing team. So just a big thank you to you, ladies. All right, so in the spirit of early learning, thank you so much for sharing that example with us. We've been getting a lot of questions about how do we braid funding for early learning? And some folks had said, hey, can you provide an example for that? So we wanted to just share with you one example of how you can braid early learning programming. And so what I would love to invite you to do is we have an optional collaboration time after our early learning presentation today at 1 o'clock. So if you are wanting some technical assistance or workshop time on how to braid funding, or if you just want to learn more about early learning, our early learning staff will be standing by, as well as I will be here to support you with any of those things. So just wanted to show you one example that we worked with OSPI and ECAP on, and how you can braid funding. One potential idea for you is if you have different funding sources, that you can actually do a cost allocation based on the number of students you have enrolled. So in this example, you have ECAP full and half day slots, we have special education slots, and we have tuition slots. And you can get the total percentage from each program that makes up, and then you can use that percentage of funding from each funding source to support your programming. So that's one example. The table that Emily just shared with you is amazing. I'm going to scroll back to it for a minute, because you can look at each of the federal programs up at the top and see what they will pay for, right? And so if it doesn't have an X, you can't use that funding source. And so I use this table all the time to answer questions that come in. And I wanted just to repoint that out to you, because it's been such an invaluable resource for me. So just, I'd love to dig in and talk more about this example in our collaboration time, but just wanted to highlight that as a potential resource for you. And you do have the link here in the slide deck that we're gonna send out. So be on the lookout for that. I am cognizant that we still have an hour before lunch, and you have been on the computer a long time. So I just want to give you a brief stretch break. So if you want to take 5 minutes to go fill up your coffee or tea, grab a morning snack, we invite you to do that. And then we're going to jump into, in the spirit of Title I, how do we partner and engage with families for our programs as we're dreaming big for kids? We have some really cool resources from MTSS to share with you that are coming out from NERN, which is the National Implementation Research Network. But first, we just want you to make sure that your needs are taken care of. So go ahead and take a stretch break, and we will, if you're here in person, go out on the deck if you want and get some fresh air with your cup of coffee or tea. And we will see you back here at 11:15. Thanks, everybody. All right, welcome back. We hope you enjoyed that break. Got maybe some sunshine. It's amazing what 5 minutes of some sunshine can do. All right. So we are excited to kick off today with Dreaming Big for Early Learners. And so when we dream big, we don't want to just make those dreams for ourselves, but we want to dream with students. We want to find out, what are they dreaming about, right? And in the spirit of early learning, we want to partner together with families, students, and the community to do that. So just like we talked last time, we talked a little bit about the Swiffer story. Do you guys remember that? So the Swiffer story is Procter & Gamble. So are you guys hearing music on your end? Just checking? No. Okay, perfect. Okay. So double checking that, sorry. Okay, so Procter & Gamble. So they came out with the Swiffer mop, and it was because of a hard time. So their sales were actually declining rapidly, and they thought it was their soap. So they started putting all this money into their soap and getting ready to relaunch their soap product. But after they talked to their consumers, they were like, hey, it's not the soap at all. It's actually the mop. And so the Swiffer was born, to make a long story short, and their sales skyrocketed. So the same concept can be used in education. So we dream big for early learners by talking with our families and our students. What is it that we want to put our efforts and our resources in? And that's what we want to do together. So this is a great quote that I wanted to show you today about what it means to really engage with families. So I want you to take a second and just take a peek at that. And what I'd love for you to do is, if you have an annotate feature on your screen, whoops, I'm going backwards. I want you to use your annotate feature to just heart, stamp, write on what are the pieces of this quote that stand out to you. So I'm going to give you just like 30 seconds to read it. And I'd love for you to use your annotate feature. For those of you who don't know where that is, on the bottom of your screen, you should have a button that says annotate. Sometimes it's at the top and you have to click the options menu. It's a little drop down menu. Sometimes you have to click the more button depending on which Zoom version you have, but it's a fun tool. So go ahead and read that quote and find your annotate feature while you read. Awesome, Jill. Thank you for being the first to highlight. Yeah, families. It's key. So as you're ready, like Jill did, go ahead and find that annotate button and tell us what's meaningful to you. Partnership. Thanks, Amy. And if you're in the room, you can just tell me. Thank you, Annie. Take care. Happy summer. Can't wait to see baby pictures. I think when I read this quote, what stands out to me is that equal partners, right? Sometimes we don't, I've been just as guilty, bring in families from the get-go to dream big and build the vision together before we even select any of the practices, right? And so for me, in order for that to happen, I also think about this trusting and authentic relationship where we actually I have to check my thinking. Am I viewing our parents and our family members as the experts? Because they are, right? They know their kids. And so they are our biggest asset and resource. So checking our own mindsets and working on that with our staff, I think is really important to open up the capacity to engage in this work of outreach to families and dreaming big together. So another thing that we often talk about is community, right? Community is key. We are in the community as schools and we are the community, but we don't always talk about what does that actually look like, right? And so just some ideas for you on who you can bring in to partner and have community stakeholder groups or partnerships. Somebody once said, I think I'm going to stop using the word stakeholder because it already implies that we're bringing someone from the outside in, but really we are immersed in the community and the community is in us. And so it's really about collaborators, partners, equal partners, right? And so can you partner with some churches or nonprofit organizations? I know sometimes there's Big Brother programs or mentorship programs that can happen. Partnering with our community health providers. Some of you might have student assistance professionals or people in the mental health field or wraparound services that you can bring in. So government organizations, perhaps city council or a chamber in your local community. Libraries, law enforcement, firefighting, all of those pieces are people you can bring in and partner with who are immersed in the community, who know it well, and that can partner with us. So I invite you to see what organizations are in the community that you're serving and how can that enhance our system and give us those multiple perspectives needed to make a change and dream big. I love this tool. It comes from the NIRN, the National Institute Research Network. And so remember, Emily shared one of the requirements for Title I at the end of the year is to evaluate your parent and family outreach. So this is a great tool to help you do that. But even more so, it's a great tool for dreaming big in launching into next year. So really what this is these are 4 different facets to think about when you're trying to select who to partner with in any certain endeavor that we're having, any dream that we have for kids that we're building to kids. And the people closest to that problem of practice, the beneficiaries, right? If Procter and Gamble, they went and talked to their customers that were doing the cleaning in that case. But in education, who's the direct beneficiary of this work that we're doing? Who's the closest to it? Who's the student, the parent, the family member? That's the people that you want on your team, right? So we talked a lot about last time, those multiple perspectives. If you remember that cone in the cube analogy, we need each other. We can walk through the same system and come out with different experiences based on our own personal circumstances or where we enter through the system. So this is a great tool for you to present to your teams and just think about, you know, how can we engage with families and where do we start? This is another great tool that we will include for you in the slide deck and email, but it's the stakeholder engagement process. And I'm just going to walk you through it briefly. So identifying who those people are using the tool I just showed you. But like I said, who's going to benefit from it? Who can influence directly or indirectly? What are the spheres of influence that you have in your school, and how do you utilize that towards that common goal and that dream and vision? And I suggest we enlist everybody, because we're all in it for kids and we each have a part to play. And you can lead from any position without a title, right? You don't need a title that says I'm a leader to be a leader. And we talked earlier about how when we empower others and we lift each other up, that it actually lifts everyone up. So I want you to encourage you to go out and seek that feedback and those diverse perspectives. Step 2 is about analyzing. So what are we trying to do together, and what information do we still need, right? So who do we need to go talk to and I encourage you to think about, who do we normally not hear from, right? So that means we have to sometimes leave the school building, the brick and mortar, and we have to go out and find people or tap people on the shoulders. Like who are those communities that we don't often hear from? I often think about some of our migrant workers, our field workers who are working long hours and they are not able to come in during the day. So how can we outreach to families and go to them? And so I encourage you to think creatively and think out of the box to really get that work done. And the last step is map. So we're going to map out a plan. So what's the appropriate level of engagement? Where are they on that blue circle I shared with you? There's different levels of how we can engage with families. We really want to aim for this top. We really want to be co-creators with families and students. I really encourage you to talk to kids, even our early learners, right? They'll tell you exactly what they're thinking, and they're probably the most honest people you'll talk to. So be sure to dream big with kids. What are they wanting? What do they want, and how do we help them get there? And then collaboration is really important. So I want us to try to stay away from the informing and consulting. I think we're really great at that, and they're not bad. There's definitely a time and place for that, but really we want to move up this continuum to get to that co-creation phase. All the while, we talked a lot about plan, do, study, act cycles last time and how that ties into your school improvement process. So together with families and students, what are we trying to accomplish? How will we know that we found success? And what change will happen as a result? Like, what are we dreaming about? What do we think we want to try to get that dream to become a reality? And then how do we measure that? So I think about a great car trip, right? I was talking, if I wanted to go to Yosemite this summer, then I got to make a plan to get there, right? And so how will I know what mile marker am I at on my trip there? And for you, your destination, every context, every community can have a different destination, but you can use similar tools to get there. So some of you may have seen this with OSSE or school improvement work. This comes from improvement science, but I actually put a template right to the slide deck that you could make a copy of and use with your team to generate ideas for change. What is it that we're trying to change? So what is your goal? What are you dreaming about? How do we make a change? And what are the primary drivers? So sometimes we might list 5 ideas for change, but one idea impacts 10 others. It has a domino effect, right? So that's the target. You want to pick those drivers that really are going to have that domino effect and impact lots of other things. So How many of you remember as a kid, I used to love dominoes. It takes forever to set up, but you just need one little tip and then this whole host of dominoes fall, right? And some of you are thinking, oh, I'm experiencing that right now with springtime and change. But that my point is that one move can impact an entire community. So don't despise those small beginnings and those small, what seem like small moves and small dreams, because they can build a huge momentum and a big effect. Okay. This is for those of you really wanting to jump in and you're just like, yeah, this is awesome. I love improvement science. This is a cool test form where you can actually track your data over time. They say, hey, let's do 6 to 8 week goals and make them small, very specific, very tiny. And the reason why you want to do this is really to celebrate that success and to know, hey, am I meeting the target? Because I'm sure that we've been in meetings where you have this amazing plan, but maybe there wasn't that follow-up to celebrate the success. And that is the key, really, is that consistency. So we encourage you to use this in your team time. So this is a form for you to do that. So I have a couple examples of a district that did this. And what they did is they went out and did a series of empathy interviews. So they went and talked to families and they really were trying hard to get families from the EL multilingual learner and migrant community, because they wanted to make a change and dream big for those students and break down barriers. And so they had liaisons go out, we had phone calls, we had our Title I night that are required, and we used that for some qualitative research, if you will, some interviews, one-on-one, sitting down with parent leaders. And these are the bullet points that they shared. If you imagine like a Wordle, if you gather that data and you see frequency, you see things start to come up more and more and more. This is kind of how we built this. So the themes, if you will, that came out is parents shared with us, we really want classes on how to help because school is so different now. And I don't know how to help my child, and I really need it in a language I can understand. If you could point me in the direction of bilingual staff, because sometimes I go into the office and I don't know who to talk to. So having a designated person that I know I can go to at each building, right? Cultural celebrations. So kids recognizing and honoring and celebrating diverse culture and having that be part of the general community. Having adult mindsets align with that vision. So what is it we're trying to do for kids? And then having teaching kids how to celebrate culture as well. So those were some of the themes that came out from families. And these are some of the quotes that hit my heart pretty hard. And I think that there's power and strength in community. And sometimes we, in our mainstream culture, it's sort of that individual win, right? Like we're going to work hard as an individual and we're going to win. But sometimes we have to really remind ourselves, because of that dominant culture, like there is power in strength. And I want you to challenge you to think about that team-driven leadership aspect of MTSS, right? So there's power in a team. I have a team I'm a part of, and we started doing some presentations for a statewide network individually, or like with one or two other people. It took quite a bit of time. It turned out good, but it took like a month, right, to get this done. Well, recently for our next PD, we had this idea, like, why don't we do it as a team? Do you want to know how long it took us? Any guesses? It took us one day, and we had it nailed down. And it was probably the best PD we've done yet, because of the power of teaming, right? And so sometimes that old adage, work smarter, not harder, that the answer's right in front of us. But for me, I know it's hard to get out of that traditional way of doing things. So I encourage you to blank slate. If you could dream big and do it collectively, this idea of collective leadership, there is power in it. And I encourage you to think about how can I apply that in my own setting and where I'm at. So out of that series of events, remember the parent said, we want to learn how to help my child. I need it to be in a language I understand. We want to honor and celebrate and teach culture. Out of that came a series of art and culture nights. So this all was paid braided funding with migrant funding, Title I funding. If you want to learn more about that specifics, come talk to me. I can share with you how it was braided and kind of that back end behind the scenes. But essentially the whole district was invited. If kids RSVP'd, if they were a migrant student, they automatically got a kit. If they RSVP'd through Title I, they were a school-wide program. They got to come, and they got a make and take kit. So for the music and culture night, kids read Rosie Revere, the engineer, in English and Spanish, because in that particular community, Spanish was the dominant second language. And they got to engineer their own instrument, and they got to they had kids submit videos. I was going to check and see if I had the videos on here, but they submitted videos via Flipgrid and got to share, because it was all virtual, because this was during the COVID year. Another night was a string art night. So how many of you have been to a paint night before, at least know about them? Yeah, so you can follow like a real life artist and paint along. We did it via Zoom, and we did a Mexican string art night, which was awesome, and learned about the culture. And then for the dance and culture night, we did a live Zumba where kids followed along, and we had an expert in a traditional dance from Michoacan. And what was really powerful about it is the families are the ones that really rallied around and planned it all. So another thing that the families said, it was like, mental health is huge, but there's a stigma around it, right? And we know and have experienced through that pandemic that we can all benefit from having a healthy mental thought process. And so they wanted a series of health and culture nights. So the parents, they voted on which topics to host, and we brought in experts from the community, depending on the topic. So one was suicide prevention, substance abuse prevention, etc. And so depending on what the topic was, a guest speaker came and taught the class, and we got community baskets to rally around and raffle off. All of this was possible because of a culture of inclusion and that collective empowered leadership. And we used a book at the Early Learning Center to really teach this to kids. And I love this book if you have a chance, if you haven't read it. It's by Joanna Gaines, so if you're a Fixer Upper fan. But a parent said, Stephanie, we should really have all cultures be celebrated, not just the ones from Michoacan. And I said, yeah, that's great. And the parent said, it's like if they all decorate their own culture on their instrument, it's like confetti. It's so beautiful, but each piece is so different. And I opened this book, and lo and behold, there's a story page about that. And it says, today is the day for the ride of our lives, when a confetti of color will fill up the sky. Plenty of pink and a bounty of blue, orange and green and yellow too. And so this book is about kids creating their own hot air balloon, each different, but each beautiful individually and uniquely, like each of you are. This applies to us adults too, but together, collectively, it makes something really, really beautiful that we couldn't make on our own, right? And so it's about empowering others. And sometimes that means dismantling some of the structures that are already in place, right? So what do we need to kind of dismantle so that everyone has that access to be empowered to lead from wherever they're at? And I tell you that when a team of individuals work together towards a common goal, I even have a saying about this in my office, my ESD colleagues can vouch for that, that there's unlimited potential. So I do believe this. So so this is one of the nights where kids created their own hot air balloon as a result of that book with that string art. I want to share the power of teaming. So our parents as partners really collaborated and developed this dance all on their own. They practiced 2 nights a week. We had our a liaison come with us, but I'd love for you just to take a listen to this video for a moment. part of this video at the end. So this is the dance it's about all the work that comes to life through the music and the the music is faster and they get more active. And I love the end, which I'm going to fast forward and show you, and you'll see. Everyone falls down because they're exhausted, right? Because the music ended. So it's a really fun traditional dance that the families wanted. And it was so fun because a lot of the parents were like, I remember that from when I was young. Oh my gosh, that's so cool. And they were so excited that their kids were learning about that culture that they grew up with. And so it was a really fun way. These were some of the screenshots. They were all via Zoom. And some of the kids' artwork that they turned in. The parents, like I said, practice 2 nights a week, all during COVID. So they had to do all the social distancing and masking and all of that. But it was an awesome opportunity. The final was an actual paint night with a Yakima Valley artist. And they learned about the monarch butterfly, which migrates to Mexico. And so the team all met via Zoom. And I think the coolest piece, this was some of them putting together the make and take items, is I wanted to share this video with you. So this really speaks to the power of starting small. So this was one of the parent officers. Well, I might not be able to play. Yeah, okay. Sorry, it sounds like we froze on you for a moment. So for those of you who don't know, they have a super cool subtitle option in YouTube now. And you can choose the language you want it to. So she's going to speak to us in Spanish, but I have English subtitles for you, and let's hope the video.
Hola, mi nombre es Kareli y a mí me gustaría compartir que me gusta mucho que mi papá sea un líder en el programa porque yo lo miro a él y eso me inspira a mí a ser líder también. Siento que también inspira como a otros papás, como a involucrarse también en el programa y yo veo que mi papá siempre como él trabaja, pero en todos modos le echa muchas ganas y siempre trata de estar en las juntas y siento que eso motiva a mucha gente y a mí y a mis hermanos también. Entonces me gusta como el ejemplo que él da y, y eso inspira a mucha gente y siento que eso es muy bueno para como la escuela, el programa y toda la comunidad.
So she had kind of shared how her dad's participation had really inspired her to get involved. So she went on to become a part of a migrant student leadership team that got to advocate and got to speak to Superintendent Reichdahl. He invited students in and to change policy for students all across the state. And so just an example how that butterfly or a snowball effect can happen when one change occurs. And so I encourage you, don't be afraid to start small. This was 2 years in and blossoms happened, right? Fireworks is what we like to say happen based on just starting small. And so including students are never too young to be included in leadership. And this is a great quote from a research study, but when we include students in school governance and decision-making, I would say no matter what age, they're learning skills that can impact our greater society and good for years to come, because as you know, they are our future, right? And so that is something that I wanted to share with you. So that was it but I want to pause for a moment and just see if anyone has any questions before we break for our lunchtime today. after lunch. We're super excited to have Jane, Janelle, and Jan, our early learning team, talk about systems alignment for early learning. So you won't want to miss that. We're going to come back together at 1 o'clock for that presentation. And then we are going to have an optional workshop time at the very end for you to ask us your one-on-one questions. What are you dreaming about? What are you wondering about? What is it that we can help you with at NCESD? So I'd highly encourage you, if you have curiosities or wanting to learn more, or maybe you want to start your own early learning program, that you come and join us for that. Awesome. Well, I'm not seeing any questions come in. So with that, you get some extra time on your hands to network with colleagues, to maybe if you're in the office, just have some time. Maybe you can go outside and get some fresh air for a few moments. And we will see you back here. And let me just check the time for you. We will be back here at 1 o'clock for system alignment for early learning. So enjoy your break, everybody. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We're going to get started in just a few seconds here, but wanted to say thank you so much for being with us today. We hope you had a great lunch. We have a big treat in store for everyone today. We have our J team, as I lovingly call them. Janelle, Jane, and Jan are experts of early learning here at North Central ESD. So we are excited to welcome them. They're going to continue that conversation on dreaming big for early learners and how to align our systems for the work. So without further ado, I'm going to invite those ladies up to take over. All right, not good. All right,
there we go. All right. Hello, everyone. It's nice to see you all on screen and here. It's great to have you. My name is Janelle Bursch. I'm the Managing Director of Early Learning here at North Central ESD. Fairly new to my position, but many of you know me as the person that was running the early intervention program for Chelan Douglas and Grant County here at the ESD. And my role changed in September, and I'm now the Managing Director, and I have the honor of having two very fabulous people, Jane and Jan, that are early learning coaches, part of our early learning system here at North Central ESD. So we're going to talk a little bit about what the landscape looks like for early learning in the state of Washington, what it looks like for our region, and where we're going in the state of Washington as far as early learning programming. Feel free to ask questions in the chat. I believe Molly is monitoring the chat, and if she sees the questions, she'll just make sure to give me the high sign, and we'll make sure to answer your questions as we go along. Okay, so early learning. How many of you have lived in early learning before? I know Stephanie has. It is quite the system. You may hear all of these different terms to describe an early learning program. So you may have heard Head Start. Anybody heard of Head Start? So Head Start is the federal preschool program. It's run by federal funding, and you have grantees across your states that run Head Start programs. How many of you have heard about ECAP, Early Childhood Education and Assistance Program? So ECAP is the state-funded version of Head Start and is only specific to the state of Washington. It's also under the Department of Children, Youth, and Families, or DCYF. You might be hearing that acronym quite a bit as well. Okay, how many of you have heard of Child Care Aware or Early Achievers? So Child Care Aware is the agency, and you'll find Child Care Aware in lots of different places across the state. It may be an ESD, it may be a private nonprofit, it may be all these different places. They run the professional development for childcare, licensed childcare facilities or family childcare facilities in the state of Washington. Early Achievers is the quality rating and improvement system for child cares in our state of Washington. Again, those are both specific to the state of Washington. They are all under DCYF, Department of Children, Youth, and Families. And then we have some folks at their schools have developmental preschools, right? And they are primarily serving children with special needs that have individual education plans. You might also have private preschools in your area. You might also have something that's come about in the last 2 years, transitional kindergarten, which has a whole other set of guidelines and rules through OSPI. So all of these different things, as well as family, friends, and neighbors. Can't forget family, friends, and neighbors, right, Jen? That's also part of our early learning system. And then you throw into those buckets all these different streams of funding. You might have private pay. You might have Medicaid paying for certain things. You might have people having income-based sliding fee scales. You might have funding structures where all these different funding pieces come together to provide funding for early learning. So all of these different things makes for a very complicated system, right? It is complicated, but there's a reason behind that, because let's think of the families that we have in our schools. They don't all fit in one box, do they? We have families that come in all different shapes and sizes with parents that have different work schedules. So the reason why we have all of these different early learning systems in the state of Washington is to meet the needs of all the different families that we have in the state of Washington. So I just want to tell you, keep calm. It is complicated, but we are here to help. Jane, Jen, and Janelle, we've all worked in a variety of different ways in the early learning system. Jan comes from the childcare view of things. Jane comes from school district. She was a kindergarten teacher for a while. I come from early intervention and more systems level. So we all each have a little bit of a different view of our early learning system here in the state of Washington. All right, so I talked a little bit about how it's complicated. There's actually a name for that complicated system. It's called the mixed delivery system. And if you actually Google that, it will talk to you about what a mixed delivery system looks like. It's the fact that it's a system that doesn't have one stock way of providing services. It's a system that you have private childcares and public childcares and preschools and school district services all coming in to provide services to children and families. The other important piece that Washington State has as a vision for early learning is inclusion, making sure that all of our kids that have disabilities or children that have an individual education plan or even an individual family service plan for early intervention, that there's this continuum of placement options for them to be able to access quality early learning environments. The third bullet point, high quality. What does that look like? That's something that the state is really digging in deep to find out if we can have a common definition of what high quality early learning looks like. Collaborative. This is a really important point because all of these different early learning systems cannot operate by themselves. We really need to be commuting together because childcare providers may be having childcare for children that are in the school district system. Head Start may be having children that have IEPs and the school district needs to be communicating. So it really needs to work together to communicate and collaborate. That can be hard, but it can be very, very rewarding. Okay, so why this focus on early learning? Just a few little data points that I'm going to talk about today. Everybody is pretty familiar with WCKIDS. It's been around for a while. This is just a simple little line graph that shows the readiness, kindergarten readiness for children in the state of Washington back from 2015 to 2019. We're at about 51.6, close to 52% of our children come to kindergarten ready. Now, that's another thing that many of us have a hard time capturing. What does kindergarten readiness really mean? And when you talk to a big group of folks with early learning, they talk about, well, really, children don't need to be ready. It's the receiving party that needs to be ready to receive the children that have all of these different levels of skill and abilities. Another little reason that we're really focusing in on early learning is one of the indicators that your special education colleagues look at, and that's the least restrictive environment or inclusion. So this graph here is a federal graph that shows how many children ages 3 to 5 are receiving their specially designed instruction in an inclusive environment. Washington State was rated 24% in the whole range of states. So we're kind of on the low end. So when our state saw that Washington State was so low in the way of providing inclusive services, they said, we need to do something about that. Let's put more information and more energy into providing inclusive environments for our kids. I'm not sure if many of you have access to this data, but for early support for infants and toddlers, that's your early intervention program that's providing services to children birth to 3 years of age with developmental concerns. In Okanagan County, you have Bright Start, and these are their numbers from September 2021 to April 2022. Pretty common in the 80s, low 80s, moving up to the high 80s, but they've had a pretty good, stable population of kids coming into their programs. In Chelan, Douglas, and Grant County, the Early Support for Infants and Toddlers program, this is just 1 year that we've seen. Actually, it's less than a year, but you'll see that we started at 271 in September and have moved up into 310, 305. Pretty significant growth for this particular area when we're talking about infants and toddlers. Previous to this year, we were closer to the low end of 200. So you can see we've almost grown 100% without by 100 kids in the early intervention. And those little ones are going into your developmental preschools, your ECAP programs. So pretty significant growth. I'm not sure if we have anybody on with Quincy School District or Moses Lake School District, but that's really where we're seeing a huge amount of growth in our early intervention population. So the good news, because of all of this data that the state has collected, all of the different things happening, they have increased focus on high quality research-based practices, which we're going to talk a little bit about what's called the pyramid model later on in the presentation. Increased focus on inclusive practices, which is good for every child and every family. Increased focus on parent engagement, which Stephanie talked about a little bit before, and how to engage families, not just getting them information, but having that reciprocal engagement where they're communicating with us and providing input on our programs that we're providing for kids. Collaboration between and amongst programs. This is really a lot of work happening in what's called coordinated recruitment and enrollment. If you're working in a transitional kindergarten program or your district's looking into transitional kindergarten, this is a really hot topic, coordinated recruitment and enrollment. Even if you're not doing TK, this is a really important topic. And if you looked at the document that was shared earlier, Title I really encourages that collaboration with your early learning partners, your Head Start, your ECAP, your private child cares, all sorts of different people that where your children are coming from and into the school system. So really our work, the J team, is really focusing on breaking down those barriers, those silos, and making sure school districts know who their partners are so that they're communicating and able to have those strong foundations of collaboration for their families and their children. The other piece of good news, this is the same graph that we looked at from ECTA, ECTA, but this is for our state broken down by ESD region, or central ESD. And if you'll see, 171, the children that are receiving their specially designed instruction within an REC or regular early childhood program, that's an inclusive environment, in our region, we are higher than the rest of the ESDs. This is really exciting news for all of us. We're doing well with the inclusion work, primarily because some of our larger districts, Omak, Wenatchee, Eastmont, Moses Lake, they have inclusive programs that have been running for a fairly significant number of years already. That doesn't mean that we're not going to stop working on inclusion, though. We'd really like to get it closer to 100%. And some of our smaller districts that don't have some of the resources that the larger areas have, we're trying to build up their continuum of services so all kids have access to different early learning environments. Okay, before we talk about TK, any questions about what I've presented so far about what early learning looks like, what the landscape looks like, and why we're moving in the direction we're moving? Any questions? We're good? Okay, very good. I'm going to talk a little bit about TK. Your document that was presented before us talks a little bit about TK. You may also hear it talked about as ITK. All that is referring to is inclusive transitional kindergarten. We added the I in the beginning because that shows some of the grants that are coming out or have come out from last fall to current. The reason why ITK came about or TK came about is to make sure that districts had that continuum of opportunities for kids to complement other early learning options for families in the community. Also, to really look at those kids that don't have access to early learning opportunities. So Head Start and ECAP are income-based programs. You have to qualify for income with a lower income to be able to attend those programs. Private preschools and childcares, you need to have the resources to pay for that. For those of you that have young kids, you know that private preschool and childcare can be pretty expensive. So we have this middle group of families that don't qualify for preschool with Head Start or ECAP, and they are not able to pay for private. So the transitional kindergarten was developed to meet the need of those families that didn't meet the qualification or the eligibility guidelines for Head Start and ECAP and didn't have the funds to be able to pay for private. So that's one thing that TK is really looking at, those ALICE families, asset limited, income constrained, but employed. So that's one thing that TK is looking at. Also, they wanted to have inclusive environments to make sure that our least restrictive environment, where Washington State was really low, to build that up and make sure more kids have access to inclusive environments. So here's where that coordinated recruitment and enrollment pops out. So TK has these 5 pillars, and coordinated recruitment and enrollment is this process where you're communicating with your community partners to ensure that the children don't already have access to an early learning environment. So coordinated recruitment and enrollment is a shared process among community programs serving children ages 3 to 5 to support families in selecting high quality early learning programs that best meet the needs of each child and family, and to assure that community early learning programs are working together in ways that maximize resources and serve the most children possible. So really, they don't want programs to duplicate themselves. They want to serve as many children as possible. That's where that coordination comes in. This is a statewide program too. So there's a lot of interest from the governor's office, from the legislature, looking at how these TK programs are rolling out. They want to make sure that it's not adversely impacting our ECAP, our state preschool program. They want to make sure that our private childcare centers are not being adversely impacted. So the governor is really watching this program fairly carefully. In addition to having this coordination at the local level, we also have this coordination at the state level. You have 2 huge state agencies, DCYF and OSPI, that are coordinating together. That's a huge feat in and itself, that they're talking to each other and trying to make things really, really positive for us at the local level. Go ahead, Jan.
Oh, I was just wanting to mention, like on that last slide of that level, ECAP has that separate funding and eligibility. But when you look at the community-based programs, and it might be on this slide, the licensed childcare and licensed family homes. We have what's called Working Connections Childcare Funds, also which is an eligibility piece. So I just wanted to mention that. Source of funding, that I have a source of eligibility.
And those that are receiving Working Connections childcare, that's where early achievers, that quality rating and improvement system is required. It's actually required for all licensed childcares now. Is that correct? Or is it just for Working Connections childcare?
All licensed childcare centers and family. Well, as you have that. Well, let me take that out. The first statement, all of those that are serving Working Connections childcare or want to serve Working Connections childcare. It's optional for others, but most of them participate.
Yeah, it's complicated. Funding is complicated.
She said that. Because
So what Jan was saying out in the audience was that licensed family homes and licensed child care centers receive Working Connections childcare funding. So families qualify for Working Connections, and that's how they pay for the child care program that they're in. ECAP also does some Working Connections childcare as well, and we'll not go even further down the rabbit hole and talk about early Head Start and early ECAP. Again, it's complicated, but I think what we're getting out of this is it's complicated and there's lots of different funding sources. So this particular slide talks about the breadth of early learning programs for children 3 to 5 year olds. And you'll see transitional kindergarten is one. You'll see our districts have lots of different ways that they serve children under age 5. Developmental preschools, ECAP, some of our districts in our region already have ECAP programs that they're considered the contractor for. Some of them house ECAP programs. Some they have a room set aside for ECAP programs. Head Start, same thing. We have some of our districts that are involved in Head Start, some that are separate from different grantees. We have some of in our region, some programs have CTE programs where they're aligned with the preschool and they have kiddos coming from the CTE programs and providing and getting experience with early learning in CTE programs. Grant funded, parent cooperatives, play and learn groups, private pay, tuition-based, Title I, Working Connections childcare. Again, complicated, lots of different funding sources. And along with those funding sources come different sources of requirements too. So it can be a challenge. So let's talk a little bit about the 5 pillars of transitional kindergarten. Many of you that have TK programs already know about these, but it's important if you're considering it to really look at these and know how you're going to be implementing them in your whole early learning system. And when I talk about an early learning system, I want folks to, when they're thinking about TK or the developmental preschool, really your district is looking at a whole entire system, not just a specific program. We want your district to have these different opportunities for your kids to be able to have access to the continuum. So TK is just one piece of a district's early learning system. So TK, the first pillar is you have to meet the requirements of a full day kindergarten. This is a kindergarten program. That does not mean that you do kindergarten type things, for lack of a better way, in the TK program. It must be developmentally appropriate. That means play-based, experience, ability to get their hands on things and be creative. So it must be developmentally appropriate. Again, second one, you would have certificated teachers and paraeducators providing that TK environment. Third bullet point, TK programs are inclusive, socioeconomically diverse, and responsive to the needs of children who qualify for participation. Remember, I talked about that coordinated recruitment and enrollment piece? In addition to making sure that there's no other early learning opportunity for those children that might be coming into TK, you also have a second layer of screening to ensure that they have a need for TK. We want to make sure we're serving the children that have the need for that extra pre-kindergarten experience. Fourth bullet point, programs must be fully integrated into school buildings. That means access to transportation, to specials, to lunch in the school cafeteria. all aspects of a regular kindergarten day. One thing I want to say though, it must be developmentally appropriate. So you don't want your kiddos going into the PE and sitting for 45 minutes with some game that's not appropriate. Going outside and having an obstacle course on the playground is a great activity for 4-year-olds. And music for 4-year-olds, that's really not a standalone thing, is it? Music for 4-year-olds is through the whole entire day. Okay, this last bullet point is where we're really hitting hard with that coordinated recruitment and enrollment. Transitional kindergarten programs work in collaboration with and do not adversely impact enrollment in community-based preschool programs. That's a really important pillar and something that's getting a lot of attention in the past month or so. That particular piece, there's similar wording also in the Title I booklet. I'm not sure what it's called. The Title I, what we just talked about this morning, the early learning programs. That one that Jan has. Yes, thank you.
Funding early learning activities in Washington State Title I.
Funding early learning activities in Washington State with Title I. It talks a lot about collaborating and not having an adverse effect on early learning programs as well. Okay, before I go further, do any folks have questions about transitional kindergarten? That's gotten a lot of interest. So just want to make sure that if there's any questions, I'm just going to pause for a little bit. We have a lot of districts that are interested and a few that are starting programs this next year and a few that already have programs going. Okay. What's TBIP funding? Transitional bilingual? Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. So looking at our landscape, you kind of see what's going on right now. Here's where we are in the state of Washington and what's happening with the different initiatives and different state activities and different regional activities as well. In the state of Washington, most of the initiatives are coming out of the special education or early learning piece of OSPI. So the first initiative that I'm going to talk a little bit about is the Preschool Inclusion Champions. That's our baseline initiative, and it talks about how we're working with our community partners and how you're embedding inclusive practices in your preschools that are in your school district. The next level is the State Systemic Improvement Plan, or SSIP. Not to be confused with SIP with Aussie work, which that got confused earlier on in the year. We got a little bit of side conversations with what SIP are you talking about? State Systemic Improvement Plan, again, talks about inclusive practices and also talks about embedding the pyramid model into the work of the developmental preschool with their community partners. Washington Pyramid Model, you're going to be hearing a lot about Washington Pyramid Model. That's pretty much the common thread in all of the initiatives that you might hear of regarding early learning. In addition, you remember we talked about ECAP, Head Start, Early Achievers, and Child Care Aware. Washington Pyramid Model is a common thread that's going there as well. So what that does is we have this consistency throughout all of our early learning systems so that we're all talking the same language. Inclusive Transitional Kindergarten Grants, we've had 2 rounds of those so far, and we have 1 round that is opening up June 2nd. So we have some folks that are continuing and some folks that are just joining. A lot of focus on coordinated recruitment and enrollment and attention to braided funding. That document that was given out today is a document that many of us in early learning have been looking at for a long time. It's great to have something in writing. And those notebooks are a hot topic too, because it's a little bit complicated to figure out how to braid all of these funding sources. Not impossible, just a little bit challenging. Okay. What can the J team do, or what have our activities been focused on? Right now, it's we work a lot within those initiatives and do system assessments of inclusionary practices with our districts. We have been doing quite a bit with coordinated recruitment and enrollment and having many community conversations and connections. In addition, our team has been working on getting certified to be able to train on the pyramid model. So you all that are involved in the initiatives, rather than having to go to state trainings that are on certain dates, will be able to tailor it to your district's needs. And I had to put a plug in for the STEM Summit too. We're having an early learning track for the STEM Summit. So many of the folks in our ESD are going to be at that particular event. This is a little bit hard to see for those of you in the audience, but I think for those of you that are on Zoom, you can see it. At the very bottom, in the middle of at the bottom of the screen, the small circle, it talks about what are those foundational initiatives that we're building out. That's where Preschool Inclusion Champions, this is our entry point for many of our districts down at the bottom. And as they get into the preschool inclusion work, then they might move to transitional kindergarten, inclusive transitional kindergarten, the state systemic improvement plan, and then eventually moving up to the very top outer layer of the circle, which is a Washington State demonstration site. Some of the districts around our state are going to this Learning Experiences Alternative Program, or LEAP. That's a particular program that's been developed by Dr. Phil Strain and is specific for kids with autism. However, it's very research-based and good for all children in our communities. These programs are based on implementation science. I'm certain that many of you have heard about that and talks, and we start at the exploration phase and then move out into expansion and scale up. Pyramid model. We have a lot of pyramids in our world, don't we? I feel like every time I see a new pyramid, it's something new, but kind of the same thing. So pyramid model is the early childhood version of multi-tiered systems of support. It's a framework. And so when we're talking about MTSS or pyramid model, those are really the same thing. The pyramid model is developmentally appropriate for early childhood. So really the same kinds of things. The assessments look similar, except that we're talking about preschool classrooms. So our pyramid model that we have here, here's the critical elements. At the bottom, you have an effective workforce, folks that are trained in child development and environments and how you have a strong early childhood setting for the kiddos. Then it moves up to nurturing responsive relationships and high quality supportive environments. So looking at what your environment looks like, how the adults in the classroom interact with the child and how the children interact with each other. Then going into targeted social emotional supports, and then at the top of the pyramid, intensive intervention. The reason that we have this framework, it's not a curriculum. It is to make sure that our children have the social emotional skills needed to be ready to move into more academic settings, such as kindergarten and first grade. Some of the things that we talk about in the pyramid model can be scaled up to even kindergarten and first grade. It talks about friendship making skills. It talks about how you solve problems with your peers. What we know is that kids that have these skills do better in academics later on. So if you want your kids in high school to be rocking their tests and rocking their assessments, this is where the change needs to happen. We need to have those firm foundations at the early childhood level so they have those skills, and then later on they can access the academic success that they need. Some of the things with the pyramid model, we talked about the different universal types of things that need to be in early childhood: effective workforce, nurturing responsive environments, and high quality supportive environments, moving up the pyramid to the very top where we have the intensive intervention. Now, how this is being rolled out, it's being rolled out in some of those initiatives, and it will be available to other schools as more trainings become available. But what happens is we start at module 1 and module 2, which is those foundational supports, where we talk about effective workforce and we talk about social emotional skills. These are some of the fun things. If you're a preschool teacher, this is fun stuff to talk about. How you teach kids how to be a friend, how you teach kids problem solving. And Tucker the Turtle, I put him on there because he is the little puppet that teaches anger management skills. If you have a preschool teacher and they know about Tucker the Turtle, it's really effective. When he gets angry, he takes time to tuck and think, and that's how he gets his anger management, gets his anger under control and thinks about a better solution and then moves on. So really some good strategies in the pyramid model. Pyramid model works really well with other curricula too, such as Second Step. You can put your Learning Without Tears in there. It's again, the framework for an early childhood program. The one part that I haven't spoken to very much though, it's positive outcomes for kids, really, really good outcomes for families as well. Family engagement, just like Stephanie was talking about earlier, is a huge piece for pyramid model. There's a piece of our training that talks about windows and mirrors that really sticks with me. Has anybody heard about windows and mirrors when you have an environment for early learning? What it means is that in your environment, you have windows that look into other people's early experiences, such as you might have different foods in your early learning classroom. You might have different dress up things from other cultures in your classroom. But you also have mirrors, which means that the different things in your classroom are going to be like the children that are in your classroom. So if you have kiddos that come from a Hispanic family, you might have tortillas, or you might have the mariachi band music, or you might have something that the child is familiar with, as well as something that's from a different culture that they could look at a different culture as well. So it's really a cool way to look at how you set up your environment for children to see all different kinds of ethnicities and abilities as well. And positive outcomes for staff as well. Oops, let me just, oh, how do you go back here, Stephanie? Well, there we go, okay. One other thing about the pyramid model that we're scaling up is that you have coaching. Many of you know about instructional coaches. That's part of the district. You have those available in your district. This is specific to the pyramid model, where you have a practitioner coach and you have a program coach that are looking at the practices in the early childhood setting and able to build up the practitioner, saying, you're doing these things really, really awesome. Let's keep going and let's keep doing those things to help the kids. So coaching is a huge part of this whole pyramid model sequence as well. Here's some of the awesome outcomes for families that we talk about. Teaming between family and practitioners. Families report feeling more supported in preventative strategies to promote positive engagement with the family and the community. There's really a lot of reciprocal interaction within the pyramid model framework. Families are involved if there's behaviors with the children. Families are involved in adopting different system-wide rules and guidelines for the programs. There's a lot of family engagement opportunities so that the teachers can communicate not just one way through like a newsletter, but back and forth. So just to recap, this is the path forward that the state of Washington is looking at, that system-wide continuum of services, making sure that we're communicating with our community partners, being able to access all those different community programs so that kids are able to have that complete look. One thing I forgot to mention about the coordinated recruitment and enrollment, we've tried to streamline some of those processes. You know, you have all those different programs and all those different funding sources. And if a family wants to access those, they have all those different registration forms as well. That can be a barrier for a lot of our families. So we're trying to streamline some of those forms and have one form to be able to access all of the different programs, and the programs communicate to determine what's the best fit for that particular family. So again, can't talk enough about how we communicate within our systems to be able to provide that early learning continuum. And family engagement. I love Stephanie's example of the family engagement activities. And that's really what we're striving for, is to be able to share each other's culture and each other's ideas about for our children. I have a whole list of early learning resources here that are hyperlinked in your PowerPoint. Just a few highlights here. The social emotional learning pathways, early literacy and early math. If you have early learning folks in your class, in your districts, please have them access those. They are crosswalked with the TS Gold screening, the TS Gold assessment, as well as the early learning and development benchmarks. They're great tools. The full day kindergarten guide is a really good guide to have for those early learning environments. There's the link to the transitional kindergarten 5 pillars, transitional kindergarten administrators best practices workbook. If you're considering TK, or if you have a TK, I highly encourage you to look at that administrator workbook, because it does go right through each step on how to do that coordinated recruitment and enrollment process. We also have links to the NCPMI website, Early Achievers, and the Head Start Center for Inclusion. Great practices there. And Myths and Facts of Inclusionary Practices. If you haven't seen that, I encourage you to take a peek at that. It's pretty eye-opening. It's a great document that OSPI put together. All right. That concludes my talking portion of it. Does anybody from my team have anything they'd like to add for early learning?
No, that was really good. I learned something about my job.
Again, early learning is complicated. I have to tell a funny story. I went to a conference one time, and there was somebody from out of state that was on the stage. He was our keynote speaker, and he had done his research, and he was looking into the early learning system. And he did, you know, those balloon structures. He did a balloon structure, and he was talking about all the different funding sources and programs. And pretty soon he had a balloon structure that stretched across the whole entire stage of the early learning system in Washington State. It was a little bit crazy to look at, but you can understand why we need to talk to our partners, because it's so complicated and everybody has those different needs and requirements. And sometimes that makes us not understand why the other person is operating the way they are, because we're not talking about what their requirements are. So that was really eye-opening when I saw that balloon structure stretched across the stage. So, Jan.
On that note, I'll share what I heard at Demo Battleground Church this morning about that coordinated recruitment and enrollment, or those community partnerships. He said it has to be intentional to build those relationships and have that trust, because there's a lot of grace needed in this work, right? And in early learning. And so when you're really intentional to build those relationships out first, and like you had stated, you know, understanding this is the way your program runs and what you have to offer children and families. What I have to offer. There's been that room and that bed for that grace and that, you know, just ability to move and work together and place for your community.
Yeah, those coordinated recruitment and enrollment conversations, that collaboration with your early learning partners, lots of learning can happen, lots of learning. But like we said earlier, the team makes it more robust and really, really is going to make change happen when you're having those conversations. Yeah. Any other comments, questions? Very good.
Thank you so much, J Team. I'm always amazed. I always learn something new after listening to Janelle speak and her team. They're so knowledgeable. But we are moving now to close up the day and move into our optional collaboration and workshop time. We do want to hear your dreams and wishes. So if you could share that with us. So we're going to drop the link to this survey in the chat. And this is really going to be used not only to plan our next workshop, but the way we kind of orchestrate and organize the structure of the co-op workshop. So I'd really love your feedback. We'll email this out as well as the slide deck, the resources, and the recording from today. There's a lot of iGrant pieces with the new EGMS system. So if you know a new director coming on board or someone who wasn't in, please do share the recording and have them reach out to us. I'll send a summer update newsletter with any updates or changes from OSPI as those become available. But for sure, we want your feedback. Please leave us your dreams and wishes for this group, because we are here to serve you and really to orchestrate it to meet your needs. Here's my contact information. If I can connect you with anyone at our ESD, we are here to support you. Don't hesitate to reach out if I can support you in any way or connect you with the right person. So just as we close out today, this is what we're going to close with. And then of course you can hang out for the optional collaboration time after this. But we'd love for you to share either in person here with a colleague or two next to you. One thing you took away from today that you want to apply to your practice, or you can choose something you're curious about, or maybe there's a problem of practice that you're reminded of or you're thinking about, and you have a chance to collaborate with colleagues on some potential ideas from those perspectives outside. So we're going to go ahead and give you some breakout room time. And then once those breakout rooms close, the J Team and I are here at your service to answer any questions you have. Otherwise, you are free to go. And we want to say thank you so much for joining us today. And if you could just close out today by sharing that one takeaway with a colleague and fill out our survey, we would really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody. Happy summer. Take some time to have some fun and relax this summer, and we'll talk with you all soon.